getting these tabs up and everything, I'll go ahead and do my usual little spiel here. Just to remind everybody, of course, well, first off, this is the Texas A&M Libraries group that is going to be showing off their prototype on, I'm forgetting all the different technologies here. I know it's Spring Boot, REST API, and Angular.js. We're going to, before we get started here, I do want to remind everybody, though, that while these prototypes, obviously the prototype flashiness is not necessarily a thing we're judging on, but it's great if things are flashy. The more important thing in all of this research is really to look at the technologies behind the prototypes and to figure out what platforms and what technologies we want to use for the next DSpace UI. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to James. I think you're going to be the main presenter here. Is that correct?
Yes, with some assistance from my colleagues if I get flustered.
Okay, so I'll hand it on over to you to go ahead and get started. And the first half hour is going to be more of an intro of what you guys have done, of course, as much as you can get within that time frame. And second half hour, if we can do it that way, would be more of a discussion period, Q&A, kind of to discuss the platforms and all that.
Okay. Should I start recording the session at this time?
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, I might have to
We've got a couple other recordings going on here just in case. I'm recording as well, and so is Andrea.
Okay, give me a moment to start the recording.
It will be also useful to share the slides at the end of the meeting so that we can have a PowerPoint, point out, and slide share or other place.
Good point, Andrea. Yeah, we can ask the presenters to share any slides they've done.
Absolutely. I'll bring it recording. Okay, we're recording now, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen.
Okay.
All right. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for the kind attendance here at our presentation of lucky number of prototype stuff. And this one's built around the Spring framework, Angular.js, and of course using the DSpace REST API. So some words first on why we chose Spring and Angular. So in our shop here, some time ago, as I think some of you may be aware, we had been doing development on Play 1, and when Play 2 came around and Play 1 was becoming obsolete, we found ourselves facing the problem of, well, what platform are we going to migrate to now for new development? And we tried out Play 2, but it looked like it wouldn't be an easy transition because the changes were dramatic enough on the conveniences of the framework and the languages you needed to know that it would be pretty much a total rewrite of every app we wanted to migrate. And so we had to open the floor to consider a more broad set of frameworks for our adoption. And we considered a lot of different languages, but we did have a bias towards Java, that being kind of our primary expertise here. So, and the other problem that we faced was that our client-side JavaScript was starting to get really out of control. It was a real rat's nest in production applications using JavaScript with just jQuery and not any kind of framework to tame it all. So we ended up making what I deemed some fairly conservative decisions. We went with Spring Boot for the web service side. And so it's a very prominent Java framework with a lot of conveniences for web development. There's a strong open source community around it. Lots of training opportunities available and really high quality documentation. And then we went with Angular to tame our JavaScript. And that was a good choice for us here because well, it's compatible with MVC development practices and also with object-oriented programming principles. And again, it has a strong community, just like Spring, and it has facilities in the framework for automated testing as well as automated documentation generation. So as we started developing new apps with Spring Angular, we naturally found that we were duplicating a lot of code. You know, things like basic client-server communication. Headers and footers naturally. So we ended up making what we call a seed app, where we kind of took a lot of this common code and put it into a basic app that really didn't do anything but show you a basic view and let you log in. And when we would initiate a new project, we'd clone that seed app and then start from that starting point. But obviously, a better way to go about it would be to have dependencies and kind of modularize that CDAP so that you can version it and you can actually reuse that code and change in that CDAP and change the version used by any derivative app and enjoy all the improvements. So we did develop a framework, and that framework is what we built a framework of our common code, and that framework is what our UI prototype is based on. And it's worth mentioning that this framework has also been adopted by Texas Digital Library for development of the new Vireo system, if you're all familiar with that. So let's now start looking in more detail at the architecture. The Spring Boot web service UI, as I may have implied here, has our web service core as its parent project. The web service core, in turn, has as its parent project Spring Boot. And one of our goals with our framework was to make the controller code as lean as possible. And so this is a link to GitHub. One of the things we did there was have combined API endpoints so that REST calls and WebSocket calls would be opaque, or they could be, the controller could be agnostic as to the kind of request that was coming through. We also leverage tokens to avoid sessions for our authentication. We use aspect-oriented injection around our controllers to simplify their internal logic. And we're using the Web Resource Optimizer framework to make the theming easier and more dynamic. We'll see an example of that in a little bit here. So on the Angular UI side, the Angular UI for our prototype has our core UI as a modular dependency. And this dependency abstracts out a lot of the basic client-server communication concerns. And with asynchronous data communication, what we do is we have the Spring Web Service make promises to the front end such that the data fields on the client side can be populated just in time and in an asynchronous manner. And we also have a lot of useful directives in the core Angular code. And I'm talking there about Angular directives. And those just really look like HTML tags. And we'll see some examples of that later if we dig into the code a little bit. So here's a graphical rendering of how that all plays out. The client makes its initial HTTP request to the Angular UI, gets back the index HTML. The index HTML invokes Angular, which is going to make the first HTTP request to upgrade to a WebSocket connection. And then you have a WebSocket line going down to the Spring Web Service, which is going to make the promises to the Angular UI, which then get rendered as HTML to the client. And the Spring Web Service, well, that's the thing that's actually doing the talk to DSpace's REST API. So this, I think, would be a good time to demonstrate sort of the basic functionality of our prototype, which is just kind of based around these sort of REST calls. So here's an instance that we're running locally. And so we got the REST call for communities here, for collections, drill down to communities, and you can see you can navigate the tree in such a way as this. You can see that I've been using this DSpace instance for some import testing. The breadcrumb here is actually built in a recursive manner by making calls all the way up the tree to the REST API. You can see let's see, go back to collections. Here we are. So now I'll show you an item view. That's a good example. So here's how we kind of envision that item view coming out. Just choosing some metadata fields at random, more or less, and we render the content actually on the front page of the item. So I think that's enough looking at this for now. Let's return to the basic presentation. We can get into more detail later. It's worth mentioning as well that WebSockets are good and they're pretty cutting edge. A lot of people's architectures with their web servers may not support them. But for our framework, it's as easy as flipping a switch to fall back to XHR polling. So you can do it over straightforward HTTP if that's a necessity for your for your shop. So customizing style sheets now. We can do this dynamically at runtime with the application of SAS variables using the WRO framework. And so I can actually show you an example of that. I should say that it's fairly rudimentary for our instance of this prototype because we were under the 80-hour restriction. But we've done some more work on this subsequently that makes this feature a lot more robust. So I'm going to change a SAS variable here, save that, and we see that applied right away and applied all over the site for all users. And if y'all would like to see the more robust version of that, you can also check that out. So, come back to the presentation now. Customization of headers, footers, navigation, and breadcrumbs. So in the current demo, you could achieve this by editing the HTML templates, editing the Angular basically, or by editing your style sheets. But this could also be dynamically done on a case-by-case basis as we did the styles using that WRO. So how then would you customize the metadata display on items, for example? Well, the straightforward way would be to edit the item view template and put in some more HTML to grab more stuff off JSON and put it on there. But a better approach would be to persist entities, JPA entities on the web service side, and make a form that you could, as an administrator, edit on a handle-by-handle basis. And those entities would have associated ordered field lists with maybe some attributes on the fields for glosses or whatever. And then you could actually dynamically at runtime customize and persistently customize any view of metadata at any point in the hierarchy. So for the navigation menu, it would be kind of the same story here. You need a form to edit a menu JPA entity, and there you could put in lists of URLs basically. So onto the topic of modularization capabilities. This is just a proposal for how maybe it could be done. On the web service side, you could actually have a directory where you put jars, and so you can scan for jars. You have the web service watch that directory, and then the notion would be that you'd enable testing and configuration of these jar modules through a management interface. Okay, something kind of like Drupal or WordPress, where you go to an admin page and you see the modules that are available to turn on and off, that kind of thing. On the Angular side, the whole Angular framework is built around the notion of modules. So I think you'd have like a corresponding Angular module for every such jar. So now the installation procedure. It's complicated by the fact that there are numerous components, but we've ameliorated that issue satisfactorily, I think. So a lot of production applications we do as distributed apps where we have the UI served up on one server and the web service on another. The web service, that Spring Boot application, is deployed with Maven, and the UI we deploy with npm and Bower. But for the purposes of this prototype, we put the things together into a single web app. So you have one servlet container that serves up both the Angular and the endpoints on the Spring app. And this was also necessarily done for Vireo to simplify the installation procedure for Vireo. And so that is supposed to make things a little easier on the sysadmin who's tasked with throwing these things up. And to make things easier still for future development, we're currently working on a Maven-driven strategy that leverages some shell scripts to allow you to, in a more automated fashion, do a distributed or standalone deployment of the framework apps. So another question is, what about internationalization? And this has been achieved in the context of Angular, as evidenced perhaps by this person's website here. So we haven't dug too much into that, but I have to say that it has been done. Authentication is somewhat problematic issue when you start talking about the DSpace REST API. So our prototype supports Shibboleth, and we're currently using a mock service provider, and you might see me log in automatically, and it didn't kick me off to an IDP because the mock provider just went ahead and gave me the headers and said I was good to go. But it would be very easy to hook it up to a real service provider. More recent framework that we've done allows for simple username and password authentication against our Spring Web Service. And then the web service itself in our prototype authenticates against the DSpace REST API just with one username and password for a DSpace admin. So if we were to carry on in such a way, then the permissions need to be handled by the Spring Web Service. And so you might need some more robust work in the REST API itself to deliver information to the Spring Web Service about what particular view persons may be able to do and what you should show on any particular view. So it brings up some questions that we need to answer for future development. And this is, I think, is going to have to be addressed whatever prototype gets chosen in the end. So how much responsibility do you want to place for user management on the REST web app, on the DSpace REST API, which currently just uses username and password and tokens? Or do you want to offload some of that to the UI? Or do you want to use maybe some other web app in DSpace? And how best would one put the REST API behind Shibboleth? So here's a possible proposal. I'm sure there are many other options. DSpace could utilize some of that dedicated to authorization, and that could live behind a service provider and distribute session tokens that then other DSpace components, such as the REST API, could deploy. So that does it for the presentational part of our presentation, and we'll open up to questions. And I think maybe we can dig into the demo a little bit further, and maybe dig into some code.
Thank you very much. That's very informative, and it looks like you guys have done some awesome work here. So is there any immediate questions that, that folks have on this call right now? Or do we want to see more demos, or what would we like to see? Well, I guess from my standpoint, I'll ask one of the obvious questions that always comes up to me with JavaScript frameworks, which I think are awesome, but I think I always run into the limitation of just having the server side sort of thing going up for things like Google Scholar and Google in terms of indexing stuff, like SEO sort of strategies. So I kind of am curious, have you guys dealt with SEO issues at all on the Vireo side, or with anything you guys have done at Texas A&M?
Yeah, most of the
yeah, it was a big concern for TDL when we were in discussions about whether or not to adopt this framework and if Angular was a good choice. So we did a certain amount of research around that time, and all indications seem to be that Google, their claim is that they are indexing, Angular pages or your JavaScript framework pages. It certainly has been the case for us and our Google Analytics. It does seem like our Angular apps are, indicating, data for each route, and so all evidence seems to point that it's a solved problem, well, which is good since Angular is a Google product. It seems like they should.
Right. Yeah, well, I do recall. I know that Google themselves actually came out and said they're starting to do that for their main indexers. I wasn't sure, especially with Google Scholar, since I know they have separate indexers. I wasn't sure if you guys have talked to the Google Scholar folks at all, or anything like that.
We have not done any contact directly with Google Scholar. We just through online research have unconfirmed reports that it is working with Google Scholar.
Okay, well that's good to hear.
Hey, can you explain a little bit of the breakdown in what Spring Boot is doing and then what Angular is doing? Like, what are things that REST API, I guess sort of what's it either proxying or what's it value adding?
I'm Jeremy Huff, by the way. I did not mention that. So it was a big question for us. you know, when you're using an Angular framework, there's no reason right off the bat why that could not interact directly with the REST API, right? You know, so what's the purpose for a server-side middleware and like this whole web app deployment? And one of the things that we really like about the middleware is its ability to offload certain UI concerns that the REST API really probably shouldn't be messing with or really have to worry about into a server-side implementation, kind of by way of separation of concerns. We were really attracted to that idea. We also have really liked leveraging WebSocket communication. The ability for the server to do unsolicited communication to the front end has proven nifty and really enables you to create a web app that feels like a desktop application in a lot of ways. It reduces network traffic significantly, and none of that would be possible without the server-side component.
Yeah, and you really do need a persistence layer to do justice to the possibility of this separated UI. And so just by one way of example, I'll show you kind of the more robust theming capability we have here. And so, so here's an Angular UI we're seeing that has a Spring Boot sort of underneath it, and we have this theming capability actually being persistent. So there's like two themes looking at the database, and I can activate this one. Pretty cool, right? And then I can choose to activate the default if I want to. And I don't think we want to be persisting entities like these inside of DSpace. This is better persisted on the UI. And as would be the case with some of the more speculative things that we were discussing, like you know, editing the field lists associated with particular handles, or editing the navigation menu, that kind of thing.
So to persist this, does this imply then that you have that Spring Boot has its own database that it's using? Yeah.
And that currently is how it's set up. I mean, if you were to do it otherwise, you have to carve out some space in the DSpace schema for it to kind of share, you know, a database. But currently, our prototype, the Spring Boot application, has its own database.
It's using JPA actually.
Okay. Yeah, this is very cool. I was just curious how you were persisting it. So that's nice. Another point, while we were mentioning the REST API, and I think Terry Brady was on the call here. I saw it in the chat here that that there is work going on with the REST API authentication. I'm not sure if you guys had seen that. In terms of for DSpace 6, Terry has been working with Kevin Vandeveld of Atmeyer to try and get all of the DSpace authentication options into the REST API. So allow REST to actually authenticate via Shibboleth or LDAP or any of the DSpace plugins, just as a side note.
That's right. Yeah,
Kevin's kind of been doing the work, and I've been trying to help test with that. So that's a place if you're curious about, definitely need some other folks to jump in and help test on that issue.
Good enough.
Yeah, so we could definitely use more testers if anybody on your end would love to help play around. I know they've been having issues trying to get the Shibboleth authentication of the REST API working right. I've seen that going back and forth. So if anybody on your end is interested in that, I'm sure they'd love the help.
Yeah.
And I was curious to know, you talked a little bit about JPA, but could you give a bit more background on what that is?
The Java Persistence API. So in a nutshell, it saves you from having to write SQL queries to persist your entities in the database.
You want to show one of our models?
Yeah, we can just show some. Where might I go here in the framework?
I would go to into the framework. You can see an instance of a model.
Yeah, so we'll just show this in code for anyone who's curious to see an example.
Not on test. Top one. Yeah, so
this entity annotation tells JPA that this thing needs to have at least one table in the database, and you be a name table here. This is interesting. In the secrecy, we had to call it core users because users was run by Postgres, so little gotcha. You get to say what's going to be the identifying column, what's your primary key. You say what you actually need to have be a column. Other things can be sort of memory if you prefer. You know, and then the JPA Entity Manager has a lot of methods whereby you can you know, save these things, update these things, etc.
Another cool thing, if you want to go into the CDEP and show one of the repos, the repository implementation is for in Spring in JPA, we found really nifty, just because it allows for the automatic implementation of queries to the database just through naming conventions on the methods themselves. You don't have to implement them. Spring will programmatically implement them. So if I go over here to one of our repos, and I hope we have one here. Yeah. Was it? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So this naming convention right here, get user by UIN. You know, Java doesn't necessarily know what UIN is or anything, but Spring actually does the work of implementing this. And so far, it's done a really good job. There's nothing that keeps you from doing your own SQL if you're not quite getting what you want out of JPA. It's best guess, but you can write some really complex method names here to drill into your database and get what you're looking for out of it. So that was a pretty cool thing. That comes by way of extending JPA repositories right here. That was just something we found really interesting when we were getting into this.
Another big benefit is that it could have any data source, MySQL, Postgres, embedded. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, you're not tied down to any one database.
Yep. So have you guys heard that we're moving towards Hibernate with DSpace 6? Have you seen that move in the latest master code? So it's kind of a similar concept, obviously. I wonder how you feel this would sync up with that, if we wanted to try and pull these content sources together, or is that complex?
Actually, Hibernate, I think, is built on top of JPA.
It is.
So they're not mutually exclusive. So any system that can run Hibernate, so Hibernate is like JPA Plus, right? So anything that you could do with Hibernate, you know, it would not kick out your JPA stuff. So. Yep.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if there's any big gotchas you guys were aware of.
I believe JPA 2 actually does a lot of what Hibernate was made to do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was the impression we got when we were deciding between JPA and Hibernate was it seemed kind of like how jQuery influenced JavaScript kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
It just as time went on, it seemed like a lot of the conveniences of Hibernate were being rolled into JPA, and so it felt more like sticking to the basics to go with JPA for us. But both of them seemed good.
Makes sense. Other questions from others watching here?
One thing I'm always curious about is the ability to sort of create a base theme and then have sort of small derived themes off of a base theme. So we'll do that. We've got like a institutional theme, and then different departments or different collections kind of have slight customizations on top of that. And I was curious, how well would this infrastructure support that kind of localized custom theming?
We've actually been talking about that here. We got that next iteration of our WRO implementation going, and the next step is to make it so that you can actually have themes by handle or item level, and we could, you know, theoretically have it operate on multiples and through directory structure kind of allow it to dynamically apply to different stats and possibly even HTML.
So if you saw James just added a new theme, and since the values for those other things are persistent in the database, there's no reason why a default set couldn't pre-populate a new theme. Or you could have a feature where you select another previously created theme and say, you know, copy, and you get a fresh copy of the same theme, and then can edit it as you want.
Mm-hmm.
We should make that one a point. That's X value.
Okay, yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Hey, look at that. You're an artist.
And so, yeah, we'd like to be able to then associate a given theme with, handles, or it could be global.
That's a good justification for a web service is like collection scope themes.
We got exhibition there on this.
Yeah.
For this to be clear, this is not part of our DSpace Zero. This is not any of the hours. But
it is part of the framework now, though, so it would be available.
Right. Yeah, and that's okay if you did a little extra work beyond the 80. It's kind of just trying to get a sense of how much work this sort of project would be. I guess another question that I have in general, you guys have mentioned the WRO framework frequently. Like how big and complex is that, and what kind of is that? Where does that fit in here? I'm not sure I quite understand that.
We're bringing it in as a Maven dependency, but it's set up kind of at a component level, so you're only bringing in the parts of it that you need. And then we've got a couple of configuration and implementation classes that kind of extend its functionality. So the part that actually lives.
Do you want to maybe show the config?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, that might help. Yeah.
This is a big concern that I had when we started going down this road. Is it seemed kind of like a beast to me potentially, but I was really happy with the footprint that it left on our code. You can see there's nothing there.
Are we logged in?
I should log in.
If that file didn't exist in this branch.
Yeah.
Okay, so all the WRO4J specific stuff is here. I guess not all of it. But basically, what we've done in a couple cases is overridden its default behavior. And so we'll be extending something that came from WRO4J and just providing, like in this case, it allows you to reload the cache dynamically, but only in debug mode. So I adjusted, overrode that method so it would be enabled whenever we have it enabled. And that's what lets us have that theme change colors without a refresh. But in the POM, we are bringing in WR4J as a dependency, and then we're telling it we just need the extensions.
And are you guys familiar on our local sunshine?
No, we're bringing that into it.
Oh, that's not our extensions, their extensions.
Right. And then within the framework itself, our configuration of WR4J gets a little complex, but basically we're just driving the WRO4J and telling it what's called a post processor. This is what's actually injecting our SAS variables that we're getting from our database into the processing pipeline. And so we're injecting what we wrote, which is a theme manager service, to kind of interact with all that. And so we're passing that to WR4J, and we wrote a custom post processor that can actually ask for those variables dynamically.
Okay.
So it's a series of little things, if that makes any sense, builds up to being able to do everything. But this is the post processor itself. All it's doing is bringing in the CSS that was defined in a application properties file. And then before it renders that SAS, it's asking the theme manager service for a formatted version of the SAS variables. And so the theme manager service provides that. We append it into the pipeline and then put in the SAS that we got from our remote locations. They can come from anywhere, the SAS files themselves. And then you append that in, close the reader and the writer, and it's just available. And so this only happens when you need a new version of it. So it's cached until we hit that endpoint that told it to reload the cache. So basically, you can have like say 6 different SAS files that are all appear as one CSS file to the Angular endpoints, and so that offloads a lot of the rendering and loading of CSS.
Okay, so I'm still not sure I quite get the split of what you guys have written versus what you pulled from elsewhere, and I think that's what I'm trying to comprehend here in terms of which parts of the framework, like how many pieces are there here?
Yeah, so WRO is a dependency, a maven dependency that we're bringing in for the purpose of compiling SAS and real time. The issue being, once you deploy as a WAR or web app, getting freshly compiled CSS into your available static content requires some Java manipulation to kind of bring it into the application context, and that's what WRO is handling. WR doesn't seem to really address the concept of a theme or a persistent set of CSS that you would consider a theme, or the ability to swap between themes. So that was what we implemented, was the idea of theme. But all WRO is doing is really giving us the ability to transpile SAS to CSS and bring it into our available static content in the web app.
Gotcha.
Yes, its main purpose is it can offload a lot of the front-end technologies like Compass and not Ember, CopyScript. Yeah, a lot of the things that you have separate tools on the front end for as a developer that you just kind of run. This can do all of it while the app is running and provide it without having to restart an application. So.
Okay, so that makes sense. So then, so you're pulling in WRO to do all that stuff into a Spring Boot based web service framework.
Yes.
And then you have, am I understanding this correctly, you have a core Spring Boot based framework that then you're extending to build the prototype? Or
Spring Boot doesn't impose any structural limitations on somebody. When you go to start your Spring Boot app, you have available all these tools, but there's no real guideline for how to implement them or how to put them together. So our core framework was basically just using Spring Boot to build a web server that was designed to communicate with our client-side JavaScript. Mm-hmm. And all the kind of tools that we felt like were making that process easier to achieve the things that we wanted to achieve, we bundled together in our own parent project. So the chain of heredity goes, you have Spring Boot as a parent of our server-side web service core.
Right.
And then that, in turn, is a parent of whatever application you're writing.
Gotcha.
And that makes up the server side. Similarly, on the client side, you have Angular being the parent of our UI core module, an inherited module. Yeah. Right. And then, in turn, that is a module that's imported by whatever UI you are writing. So in this case, it would be DSpace.
And one of the details worth noting is that our core web service is rendered mighty lean by the fact that we don't do views in that context. The only view per se is REST endpoints that feed to JSON.
Okay.
So all the stuff you might consider more viewy, that's taken care of on the Angular side with those templates.
That's true.
Okay. So
real separation concerns.
So not to harp on this a little bit, but one other follow-up question then is if we were to go this route for the new DSpace UI, what is it that you guys, what would we be doing in terms of those core, the core framework and the core Angular.js web app? Would those still reside at Texas A&M, or would we try and build those in a more shared fashion? What would you guys see? How would you see that going forward?
So we,
yeah, I think we'd want to open it up pretty widely. I mean,
okay.
At least there'd be a fork of this that would be considered part of DSpace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree. I just wasn't sure where the boundaries are that you guys see between what you need internally versus.
Yeah, we want the thing to be open source, the more open, the better.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been developed all in-house in private repositories. We open sourced a version of it for the purpose of this UI challenge, but when we started working with TDL and they moved on to the framework for Vireo 4, we made the decision that we wanted all these things being open source, and we're right up in the process. Very soon, we will make public the repositories with all the commit history that we have privately. I think we're going to convert those pretty soon now to public repositories. And yeah, it's our ambition to have them be open source platforms.
Cool. Yep. Sounds good. Any other questions?
I have with the Spring Boot web service. So it's talking right now to the DSpace REST API, but now that you have this new server-side component, another option could be to talk to this Hibernate API that's part of the DSpace core that has sort of the full set of functionality of what you can do versus what's been exposed to the REST API. Would that make sense to shift, or is there something in the design of all this that really is assuming sort of the streamlined data structure of a REST API? I don't know if that makes sense.
We have considered such a thing, I don't think. I guess I'm not sure what that Hibernate API really looks like.
It's just the Java API. It's the new version of the Java API. So he's talking about switching from REST to Java, which I think the big change would be with Angular, which I'm not sure that Angular can talk directly to a Java API. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So that would, if you wanted to talk to the Java API, it would make the web service component an essential thing, not just a preferred thing maybe, but you would have to have that. Part of this seems to me to be almost like an aesthetic question about just kind of ideal configurations for these kind of applications. And for my part, my 2 cents on that is I love that DSpace is going down the REST API route. I love seeing that in there. And I know we've talked a lot about just the idea that when you do that and you make this common API that's consumable by so many different technological platforms, you really, let's say someone comes along and they just, we end up picking this UI solution, but someone else just hates Spring or something, or they're a Ruby shop. There's no reason why they couldn't also implement something against the REST API, which is not the case if you're investing your time and effort into the Java API. So my 2 cents is it seems like possible, but I think REST, I like the way REST feels.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions here? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to tack on another question, I think we're all asking the same question in different ways. So say DSpace REST added another endpoint, like recently we just added hierarchy. So if you wanted the full community and collection list of this, instead of having to get object and traversing, this new endpoint that just got added for 6, it becomes available in DSpace REST API. What happens to your app to accommodate that? Like, I think the middleware is pretty transparent. Like, it just intercepts things and injects tokens into it. But in terms of making use of it, just I guess a high-level overview of the life cycle of dealing with that.
So the way that this works is we have a DSpace service inside the server side, and that DSpace service maps to the REST API. Over here.
No, not that one.
Sorry, I'm having lots of overlays and pop-ups there.
No,
Getting in the way. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so take a peek at this. So looking at Java. What am I doing?
Does master have the latest?
I might be on the wrong branch here. So I'll just answer this question conceptually. The idea would be that you have a service for your repository that maps to whatever REST endpoints are there. Now, it would be the same thing if you were connecting to REST directly from Angular. If the REST API added or changed its functionality, the app's code would have to change in order to connect that specific piece of REST functionality. For us, let's say our Spring web app had an endpoint get hierarchy, and the DSpace REST API changed its endpoint for get hierarchy. well, there would be a disconnect there, but the UI component, the Angular component, would still be calling the same endpoint for get hierarchy on the Spring Web Service, and all that would have to change is how the web service was connecting to REST. That connection would have to be made in order to complete the pipeline and allow it the front end to communicate straight through the middleware with the REST API. So basically, the Angular app is totally agnostic to what's going on in DSpace REST. It's only concerned with the endpoints and the controllers on the Spring Web Service. The Spring Web Service has the responsibility of making sure that it has a Java class that's capable of connecting to the full suite of functionality that's available in the DSpace REST API. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just the concern would be how much you might have to like duplicate or something. Like, so say we wrote, because I think does this interceptor, does it have to like repackage the JSON, or because I guess maybe something like get hierarchy currently in 5x to implement get hierarchy, you'd have your Angular call get hierarchy, and then behind the scenes there might be 100 or 1,000 REST calls just calling everything, getting its children, getting more info.
Yeah.
So once you get the actual hierarchy method in the DSpace REST API, you replace that with a much more efficient single call.
Can't wait.
Yeah, we were looking for that one when we were building. The way that our prototype is working is we're just passing the JSON to the front end as is. Like as we got the response, we're handing it on board. But you do have the opportunity to curate that data if you wanted to. So if there were things coming from DSpace that weren't necessarily appropriate for the specific feature that you're trying to implement, you could potentially, you have that opportunity in the middleware to impact that data on its way out. I don't know, maybe that would be a bad practice, but currently we are sending to the front end what the middleware is getting from the REST API. It's just kind of acting as a proxy kind of.
Okay.
So that middleware sort of acts like a proxy REST API, essentially? Am I correct in that?
It's also, you could use it to aggregate, different item sources to create one big list. You could do special statistics that aren't in DSpace. There's a lot of things that it could do.
So it could potentially even call into the Java API if something was not available in the REST API, assuming that DSpace was running on the same server as that, or it could connect to it.
Yeah, you could extend it to multiple services.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's something else we've explored is you can actually use this to connect to multiple instances of DSpace, multiple versions of DSpace, and aggregate together. We don't want to scare anybody, but you could even conceivably configure it to connect to multiple dams, if you wanted to.
Right.
It's kind of a cool idea. We're very intrigued by that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Only one repository in existence right here, and no forms to add new ones or get rid of this one, but you can imagine aggregating collections, communities from various REST APIs.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I wonder if I don't know if you have a tab up here, but I wonder if you could walk us into like what the Angular sort of side of things looks like, because I think that might be the area where we're least familiar. Like a lot of us are Java folk, so the Java stuff kind of makes sense. But I just wonder what the Angular side sort of looks like.
Do you want to walk through that one? Or
yeah, Angular is awesome.
I thought that look at long the prototype itself rather than the framework.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's the framework, and then we also got Angular prototype.
Yeah.
Like show the item page, for example.
Okay.
The item view,
Yeah. So because this is being hosted served up by the middleware itself, which is not necessary. It could be served up by Apache or whatever, but this just happens to be how we did it. So this is an Angular app. We have on the outside a bunch of kind of utility structure to kind of support the app, but this is the app itself right here. You can see that it's distributed JavaScript, which is, that's super cool for front-end development. You used to be you just have one big long document, and those days are over, and that's wonderful, you know. So you see a lot of familiar things here. Index.html is kind of your main entry point to the application. That would be like your main function. All traffic, all HTTP traffic that's not an XHR request is kind of rerouted to, you know, through index.html. And
indeed, some XHR requests would be through index.html if you were under that protocol.
You can see that we have, let me just jump to this NG view. Also the view. Give me 1 second. I just want to kind of show you. Here we go. So we have this element right here, and it just has this property on it, ng view. So Angular will now use this element as an injection point for all of its route loading. And let's see. At any given place, I'll just pull up a view. We'll do like the item view here. You can see this is a partial here, but it's just HTML. That's one thing I love about Angular is it's HTML with HTML potentially validating things like properties and attributes just kind of thrown on top in order to get the functionality that you're looking for. This is a reference to the scoped object item. You can drill into it to get name and throw that out on the page here.
There's just properties on that JSON item. Yeah.
And so every aspect of the HTML is scoped to a controller, and that controller kind of handles all the information that's going to be addressed in that section of HTML. So we'll take a look at a controller here. Take a look at this item controller. You have your main app object. You instantiate a controller by calling the controller method on that. You give your controller a name. And then you have your callback function as basically the controller's definition. To that, you can dynamically inject anything that's present as a available service or factory. So, you know, these ones with the $sign came from Angular. These are built into Angular. And the ones without the $signs are ones that we created. And Angular actually does the work of finding those objects and injecting them, passing them into this function. And then you can see that we have a scope. This object is basically everything that's going to be exposed to the view. So you can see here, I am putting an item on the scope. In order to populate that item, I take our item model and I call get on it, which in the implementation of that model does some communication with the backend in order to fill this up with the item. And because of our unwrapping and promise structure, as soon as that data becomes available to the front end, it ends up popping out onto the view. And I'll go ahead and, if you want, and we can take a peek at this item model just to kind of get a feel for what that looks like.
And that's what actually makes the REST call to the web service.
Okay, this is items, item model, here we go. All right, so you can see that models themselves are not necessarily addressed as first-class entities in Angular. We kind of invented a model by using some of the functionality of a service. So we have our item model here, and it utilizes some of our core functionality, this web service API that we have and an abstract model that we built in order to kind of accomplish these things. And you can see that the magic kind of happens by passing a promise into the constructor here, and that promise is then unwrapped onto the object when it arrives. And this stuff is made available. The unwrap method is placed on this object by extending that abstract model. So this is some stuff that's kind of confusing, and that's why we abstracted it out to the core, right? Because it works, you know, and you know, we didn't want to have to worry about it all the time. So that get method that's being called by the controller is right here. And what it does is it creates a promise it uses another one of our core services, this web service API called Fetch. It defines where it wants to touch in the web service. So we're able to drill into a specific controller and a specific method on that controller. And it then basically places that promise on the item itself so that it can be unwrapped once it's received. So in general, that's kind of the flow of data into the Angular application.
And for the most part, those models are all very similar to each other, and what you just changed is how you're addressing the resting point.
Okay.
And any specific method that you update.
Yeah, or if you need specific methods on the model.
So then it looks like if people wanted to do more significant customization at the UI level, a lot of that is mostly touching just those HTML sort of components, those small fragments of HTML and that index.html page.
It would be really easy to accomplish. There's this routes file in the config, which basically maps a specific URL that's in the views. So you could build your own template and kind of change where this is pointing. You can also do a controller assignment at this point. So you could say when this view loads, it's going to be managed by this controller. This is kind of a homegrown feature that we do some client-side access control, which is really just for the purpose of convenience and like user experience, because nothing is truly secure on the JavaScript side. I mean, so anyone could use the browser tools to obviate these things, but
the web services.
So the web service does additional access control that is like the actual security involved here. But.
Okay.
You could customize these views by pointing somewhere else.
Okay, very cool.
I was just going to mention that in fact it is possible that if for instance we were maybe to have like a DSpace module that comes is deployed with the UI, you can actually have views or like standard default views that existed in that module that the routes file would then point to, and then that would enable people as they deploy the project to kind of override those or point at the non-standard views or custom views if they wanted to.
Okay, yeah, that'd be nice. Okay, well, I'm noticing the time here that we're almost to an hour, but I want to see if there's any other questions here before we start to wrap things up somewhat.
Well, thanks for an excellent presentation, Texas A&M.
Yeah, this is a lot of awesome work, and I think we'd definitely love it if you guys could share your slides for sure, since it has some useful links there, and then we'll have this presentation posted as well. And I guess any other information you can pass along, I can make sure it gets posted up on the wiki page, because this seems like there's a lot of pieces here, but there's a lot of really cool stuff.
Those of you who recorded, who have been recording this, please remember to stop your recording before you exit from WebEx.
If you don't mind, I was just going to mention what we have up on the screen right now. We have just completed documentation on our core framework, both for the UI and for the web service, and those y'all will be able to look for those on our wiki or on the README on the GitHub repo. So this stuff has been we at least have a first draft of documentation for all of this.
Excellent. Very good. Well, yeah, again, thank you very much. This is an excellent prototype for sure. It's going to take a little bit of time to dig into all of it, but I think it's a lot of great work here. And it's great to hear that you guys are using this in other areas, of course, with Vireo and all that sort of stuff. So we appreciate all of your hard work and the presentation and all of that. And I'd like to also remind everyone that our next presentation then will be on Monday at the same time. Link will be sent out later on this week, and that's going to be a Rails and Bootstrap prototype done by Monica Mevenkamp and Kate Eckertina. Ekaterina. So that'll be the next one coming up. And also remind everybody that we have a little a form on the wiki as well, which is our feedback form. So anyone who's watching this now or later on, if you would fill out your thoughts in the feedback form, it's a totally public feedback form. We'd love to just hear from everybody in terms of what your view is on each of these prototypes as we're going through them. Thanks again, Texas A&M, all of you guys. It's very informative. Lots of good information here, and I think we'll go ahead and close it out there.
Well, thanks for all attending.
Appreciate it.